I'm Aaron Porras, and thanks for joining us from our studios in Israel. Coming up in today's newscast, it turns out that Israeli forces may have been secretly aiding Syrian rebel groups against the Assad regime. The UK plays host to a pro-Hezbollah and anti-Semitic march, and some NFL Hall of Famers come to Israel for the trip of a lifetime. Stay tuned for the latest news in Israel. Israel's been mostly staying out of the Syrian civil war, but rebel groups on the Syrian side of the Golan Heights are now claiming that they've received funding and training from the Jewish state. The arrangement has been in place since as early as 2013, according to the Wall Street Journal, who talked to Syrian rebels as well as, quote, people familiar with Israel's thinking. The sources told the Journal that a special unit has been established in the Israel Defense Forces to oversee the operation, which is intended to keep Iranian proxies like Hezbollah away from Israel's borders. Reportedly, Fursan al-Julan, or Knights of the Golan, is even receiving around $5,000 a month in funds from Israel, while receiving nothing from the United States or other Western nations. The group's spokesman is saying that Israel has stood by their side in a heroic way, and that they wouldn't have survived without Israeli assistance. Fursan al-Julan has a fighting force of around 400. They managed to open up a channel with Israel when injured numbers of the groups begged for help from Arabic-speaking Israeli soldiers on the border. The wounded fighters were taken to medical treatment in Israel, where they allegedly made real contact. We're hearing reports that Iran recently shot 4 to 6 missiles into a city in eastern Syria, and therefore it sounds like Iran might be escalating their involvement in the Syrian civil war. ILTV correspondent Max Keisler is here with more. Max, what's Iran's goal here?
Well, there's a couple things going on here. First of all, the U.S. just shot down an Syrian warplane. The U.S. has been passing the sanctions against Iran's ballistic missiles program, and just all in all taking a more aggressive approach against Assad in the Syrian civil war. So Iran's definitely feeling a lot of pressure there. Then there was this terrorist attack, the one in Tehran.
I see. So is this a threat to Israel in some way?
I don't even look at this as a threat to Israel. I'd say this is a message to the U.S. saying we have these ballistic missile capabilities, a message to the Saudis and other groups in the Persian Gulf, again, we're serious, we mean business, and also a message to the populace of the Iranian regime saying we're going after the ones who did this, we're very much in power. But let's look at my report.
All right.
Sunday was a day of surprises in Syria. A U.S. Navy fighter shot down a Syrian warplane for the first time. And, for the first time since the Iraq-Iran war in the 1980s, Iran fired off a round of ballistic missiles, this time at targets in eastern Syria. It's unclear how successful the strikes were. Iran launched them from occupied eastern Kurdistan toward the contested city of Deir ez-Zor, some 500 miles away. The Iranian Revolutionary Guard has released footage it claims shows the missiles hitting their targets. The question now is, how will U.S. President Donald Trump respond to the implicit challenge? The U.S. has been sanctioning Iran's ballistic missile program, which intelligence experts say could be used to carry nuclear weapons toward targets in Israel and even in Europe. While the Islamic Republic sought to target ISIS, the timing of these strikes is undoubtedly meant to send a message to the U.S. as well.
At the Al-Quds Day protest in London on Sunday, speakers blamed Zionists for the Grenfell Tower fire and protesters waved Hezbollah flags. Fortunately, at least they were flags for the political wing of the terror group. The march, which in years past has been attended by Labour Party leader Jeremy Corbyn, was marked by vicious anti-Israel sentiment and anti-Semitism. One speaker shouted, quote, "We are fed up of the Zionists, we are fed up of their rabbis, we are fed up of their synagogues," end quote.
As we know, in Grenfell, many innocents were murdered by Theresa May's cronies, many of which are supporters of Zionist ideology. Let us not forget that. Some of the biggest corporations who are supporting the Conservative Party are Zionists. They are responsible for the murder of the people in Grenfell, in those towers in Grenfell, the Zionist supporters of the Tory party. I ask you to do your jobs. Remove the Zionist flag from the front of our procession, otherwise we will not move. We will not move. We are fed up of the Zionists. We are fed up of their rabbis. We are fed up of their synagogues. We are fed up of their supporters.
The organizer of the march, the Islamic Human Rights Commission, encouraged supporters to bring Hezbollah flags to show support for its political wing. Hezbollah is a proscribed terrorist organization in the United Kingdom, but there is an exemption for supporting its political and social activities, meaning that it is completely legal to display its flag despite its clearly violent imagery. Pro-Israel activists confronted the Al-Quds marchers, waving Israeli flags and shouting, "Terrorists off our streets." According to a participant in the counter-protest, the 20 to 30 pro-Israel activists were successful in disrupting the approximately 300 Hezbollah supporters from marching down the streets of London. Last Friday saw a horrific terror attack outside the old city of Jerusalem perpetrated by 3 Palestinian nationals, in which border policewoman Hadass Malka was stabbed to death. Following the attack, the BBC ran the story under the following headline, "3 Palestinians killed after deadly stabbing in Jerusalem." Joining me today in the studio to discuss anti-Israel bias within the international media is Philippe Assouline, an expert in political communication and international relations. Philippe, thank you so much for coming in today.
Thank you for having me.
All right, so was the misleading headline by the BBC intentional, in your opinion?
No, it depends what you mean by intentional. It's certainly happened a lot, and I think it does reflect the mindset. So yes, in that sense, intentional. They don't do anything to correct it. I think it reflects a lot of ideological and psychological predispositions, which we can get into. One of them is to reject a narrative that doesn't fit preconceived notions, pro-Palestinian notions. I think more importantly, a lot of what the left, especially in Europe, is undergoing is a reticence to address the problem and a reticence to deal with the fact of terrorism. And so to blame Israel, to shift the blame on Israel like this headline did, like a lot of the media does in many different instances, is a way to feel a sense of control over the problem, an artificial sense of control. If you blame Israel, it's much easier to control than if you're dealing with a wave of unknown evil that has very high costs and requires a lot of effort.
I mean, that being said, though, doesn't it, it almost sounds like an intentionally misleading headline because it says, 3 Palestinians killed in a stabbing attack in Jerusalem. It doesn't make any mention who did the stabbing, who was stabbed. It really washes over a lot of the details.
Yeah, I mean, and it's a recurring pattern. I think that's what matters. It's not a one-time thing. It's something that we see after every terror attack. And even the corrections take time. And I mean, there is an ideological agenda, I'm sure. Look, these writers, these journalists grew up in the age of Edward Said. They're growing up in the age of identity politics, very, very strong Arab propaganda. They're not always the brightest people. And they cling to a narrative, and it's a narrative of Palestinian victimhood. And what I believe is what I said a bit earlier, to treat Palestinians as victims is in a way to feel like you have a sense of control over the situation. It's much harder than to deal with them as people who make choices and who can be threatening.
So, first of all, how do we prevent the bias in the BBC? How do we fight back against it? How do we kind of notify them to stop this?
So that's the million-dollar question. It's what I study in my PhD. It's what I work in. The last stage is going to be the headline. The headlines now are the result of efforts that started with Palestinian propaganda 30 years ago, at least, in the 80s. The first step must be to focus on the audience and not what we want to say. The problem in the Jewish world, in the pro-Israel world, is that we're talking to ourselves. We spend a lot of money telling ourselves what we already think in very angry terms. We're doing therapy to ourselves. We have to have a narrative and a story that is inspiring emotionally to young people and focuses on them, or at least non-Jewish people. Once you've done that long enough, and you've studied what they want, and you've taken the time to invest yourself in providing them with a story that makes sense to them and is compelling, gradually the headlines will change. If you start from the end, you're not going to succeed.
So, what's the first step? What's the first thing that we kind of need to band together to do?
Give more authority to young people. Make the debate about Israel actually about Israelis. The problem we have is that people in the West justifiably perceive Israelis as a mix of what they see on TV, which is soldiers and religious people and things they can't identify with. And on the other hand, they see them as an extension of the Jewish people that they live next to, which are very often insular communities, don't mix. So if they could see the real Israelis, we would already be halfway there. And I think Gal Gadot, in that sense, is doing a lot more good than any Hezbollah organization ever. And I have tremendous respect for Hezbollah organizations.
Sure.
I work for them.
All right, well, thank you so much. That's unfortunately all the time we have. Philippe Assouline, thank you so much
Thanks
for
having me.
All right, now internationally recognized terror organization Hamas has a habit of provoking wars with Israel in the summer. But it sounds like they might be sitting 2017 out. Despite difficulties over power cuts to the Gaza Strip, the deputy chief of Hamas has told reporters that there is no interest on either side for a war at this time. Hamas holds Israel responsible for the electricity shortage, though it was initiated by PA President Mahmoud Abbas's refusal to pay the Gaza Strip's electricity bill. Many have speculated that the security situation could be exacerbated by the electric problems, but Khalil Al-Haya disagrees.
احنا بنقول لكم من جانبنا حماس احنا بنبادرش بحروب واحنا لا نتوقع حروب قديم يعني وشيكة كمان يعني بتقديرنا السياسي لانه احنا مش معنيين والاحتلال كما يقول مش معني.
Al-Haya is also saying that relations with Egypt are improving, with another Palestinian official saying that Cairo has agreed to sell fuel to Hamas to power the Gaza Strip's power station. Reportedly, though, Gaza has been pushing Hamas to prevent jihadists from entering the Sinai through the Gaza Strip.
ثم العلاقة الأمنية على الحدود ودورنا ودورهم في ضبط هذه الحدود لأنها مصلحة مشتركة. باعتقادي هذه تقريبا هي الملفات التي جرى الحديث فيها بشكل شفاف وجيد ومريح.
All in all, it's little surprise that Hamas is playing it cool. Their patron Qatar is facing substantial pressure from Saudi Arabia and other Gulf states to halt its support. In 2014, an Israeli man apparently suffering from mental illness crossed the border fence into the Hamas-ruled Gaza Strip, and since then he's been held as a prisoner. Now the IDF has given the man's family footage of his crossing. Avira Mengistu was in his late 20s when he crossed into the northern Gaza Strip in September 2014. His family says his mental condition began to deteriorate in 2011 after his older brother died from an illness. He had been hospitalized twice and received psychiatric care. Hamas claims that Mengistu is an Israeli soldier and that he entered the Gaza Strip in uniform, but his family has released proof that he did not serve in the army or carry a weapon. Human Rights Watch has confirmed that Mengistu was rejected from the IDF on medical grounds. The family saw the video 3 months after Mengistu wandered into the Gaza Strip, but this January they asked the IDF for their own copy. IDF Chief of Staff Gadi Eisenkot approved. A woman in Australia is now again calling for Israel to extradite her former school principal, who is facing 74 charges of child molestation in Australia. Malka Leifer was both the head of the Adas Israel School from 2003 to 2008, as well as a respected community leader. But now she's claiming that her mental illness prevents her from attending court hearings in connection with the numerous charges against her, including the rape of teenage girls under her charge at the school. Dasi Ehrlich was systematically abused since she was 15 by Leifer, and she says that she also witnessed Leifer molest at least one other girl. Ehrlich received a settlement of over $750,000 from the school, but she won't be satisfied until Leifer faces justice. Leifer, however, fled to Israel shortly after the molestation accusations became public. Additionally, her short, voluntary stays in psychiatric institutions have coincided with her extradition hearings in Israel perfectly. Ehrlich says this is no coincidence. She points to photos of Leifer at a festive religious celebration in northern Israel as proof that Leifer's supposed mental issues don't prevent her from living a normal life. She says that it's unfathomable how the Israeli justice system is being manipulated. The Rabbinical Council of Australia and New Zealand says that it's deeply concerned with the situation and it will be voicing its concerns to the Israeli Minister of Justice soon. In other news, Jared Kushner and Jason Greenblatt are set to return to the Middle East this week on orders from United States President Donald Trump to further discuss steps towards peace between Israel and Palestinian leaders. Kushner, the president's senior advisor, as well as his son-in-law, will be acting with Greenblatt, Trump's peace negotiations envoy in the Middle East. Greenblatt is set to arrive on Monday, followed by Kushner on Wednesday, and both will likely meet with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, as well as Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas. The White House is downplaying expectations for the trip, with a senior official telling the Times of Israel that forging a peace agreement will take time. To the extent that there is progress, there are likely to be many visits by both Mr. Kushner and Mr. Greenblatt, and possibly many trips by Israeli and Palestinian negotiators to Washington, D.C. or other locations. For President Donald Trump, it's been almost a month since his last visit to Israel and the Palestinian Authority, which was generally well received. The American immigrant community of Israel got a very special treat yesterday when Kraft Family Stadium in Jerusalem hosted 18 legendary NFL Hall of Fame players for a very festive ceremony. For the fans who drove from American centers like Modi'in and Givat Shmuel in their football jerseys, it was a long-awaited chance to get a dose of American culture, especially in a country where even the Super Bowl barely registers in the national consciousness. By all accounts, the NFL players are enjoying their trip, which was hosted by New England Patriots owner and Israel supporter Robert Kraft. Pittsburgh Steelers halfback Jerome Bettis, a 6-time Pro Bowler, says he's blown away by the love affair that Israelis have with their country, and that the experience he's shared with his wife in Jerusalem has changed their lives. Dallas Cowboys quarterback Roger Staubach is impressed by Israel's resilience and close-knit bonds, saying, "Here it feels like family." Maybe the familial feeling was driven home even more on Thursday when the NFL Gold Jackets watched scrimmages between Israeli high school teams. Earlier this year, the Israeli government had attempted to arrange a similar goodwill visit of current NFL players, but half of them pulled out under pressure from BDS groups. The English region of Nottingham has been home to some surprising sports upsets over the years, not least of which was the infamous Robin Hood's memorable comeback victory in the Sheriff's archery contest. But Israeli tennis player Dudi Selah's victory yesterday afternoon was more like business as usual. Selah, who is the 98th ranked player in the world, won the ATP Challenger at the Nottingham Open on a sunny afternoon. He defeated Italian player Tommaso Fabiano, who is ranked 3 slots below him at 101 in 3 sets at the center court. Selah lost the first set 4-6, but rallied with a 6-4 and 6-3 victory in the next 2 sets. From here, Selah now just has to make it through 2 qualifying rounds to play in the Wimbledon Grand Slam Championships in London. It's a long way from the sleepy border town of Kiryat Shmona, where the Romanian Israeli grew up. You might not know this, but in Judaism, the pomegranate is an important fruit that was often mentioned in the Torah to symbolize the fertility of the Holy Land, and it's also commonly believed that the number of seeds in the pomegranate equals 613, or the number of mitzvot or good deeds one can perform. Well, joining me today in the studio to tell us more about how they're showcasing the pomegranate's importance in Israel are professional artists Miriam Mass and Yitzhak Freeman. Thank you so much for coming in today. I'm excited to see you here. My first question is, why the pomegranate?
Well, essentially,
you can see them here.
Essentially, in and of itself, it's got a beautiful, aesthetic, pleasing form. It's an inspiring form. It represents, in many ancient cultures as well as Jewish tradition, fertility, bounty, has a certain mystery, full of life.
All right.
And I feel that the fruit invites me to find the mystery that inside. And we were very challenged, to find what is going on. And we find that the seeds, lot of seeds, as you said, hundreds and hundreds. I don't know if the number that you said it's...
Yeah, I was never patient enough to count.
But there are some people that count, and it's okay. But we found that inside there is a whole world that connects to life, to the movement of life. And every seed has a power of life and a lot of options, a lot of challenges and potential, to open your mind and whatever. And it invited us, to take out the mystery from inside and to put it on the surface in a very colorful way.
Yeah, so, I mean, and I understand that the two of you were not, related artists before this. So, I mean, how did this collaboration kind of come to be?
Well, we both work in completely different media. Miri works in soft textile fibers and color, and I'm a blacksmith working in steel, which is something a little bit cold and hard. And the juxtaposition, the idea of doing a project together, which we bring our 2 different media, her soft textile and my steel, and put them together and see where it takes us.
And it's gorgeous. I mean, I see you have gold leaf on it. You have, these beautiful patinas on the metal and these, amazing colors that are coming through.
It was a special experience to try to make synergy from our 2 totally different ways of working, of creating, from our art world. And we found that we dance in a special movement, and you can find the movement in our art, piece of art, and you can find the saying of the importance of movement in life in the other statues in the exhibition, which will be in Ben Ami Gallery in Rehov HaChashmal Street.
So you just took my next question. So I'm sorry, where was that? Say it again.
In HaChashmal, Ben Ami Gallery, Hashmal Street, number 12. This Thursday is the opening, and we invite everyone to see our special colorful exhibition.
I'm very excited. And then just my last question, since you already took it, I'll fill in a different last question. What's next? You know, are you going to collaborate on something else in the future?
I hope so. It's been a wonderful experience working with Miri, and she's definitely, I hope it's mutual that we've brought out a lot of potential in each other, and I definitely hope that we'll carry on.
You know, we passed through a very, very interesting journey, inside and outside us, and the meeting between our worlds was something very, very special. And you know, we are surprised what the next idea. We don't know now, but I'm sure that it will be continued.
And if I can just add that the exhibition is not only Rimonim, there are other sculptures as well, and that's probably the more the direction that we're going to be heading in the future.
All right, well, unfortunately that's all the time we have, but I'm very excited for the both of you. I mean, these are absolutely gorgeous, and I would love to see everything else that you have on display.
You are invited for the opening.
I thank you so much, and I will be there. I will definitely be there. Now, the university study of the Dead Sea is uncovering surprising facts about the Neolithic period of human history that might dramatically change our understanding of climate change. According to Professor Shmuel Malko, head of the research team, evidence from the Dead Sea is showing that 11,500 years ago, natural vegetation was replaced by crops, animals were domesticated, and deforestation provided more area for grazing. All of this was from Neolithic human agricultural activity, and the evidence for it lies 1,500 feet beneath the floor of the Dead Sea. A core sample taken from deep under the Dead Sea basin shows increased erosion and sedimentation from the time when human agricultural activity escalated. Next up, using the same drill core to look at 220,000 years of earthquake records, Malko says it'll be the most extensive record in the world. Now, it's probably a good thing that people can't see through walls or clothing, but an Israeli startup might be changing that, in a responsible way, of course. Vial has developed sensors that it says can see through materials, objects, and liquids to generate 3D images. Its 3D sensors utilize countless antennae to send out and receive radio signals that pass through objects. They're saying this technology will have tons of applications. It'll be able to detect breast cancer cells through the skin, and it'll also have uses in finding people buried in rubble after natural disasters or building collapses. While X-ray and MRI machines cost hundreds of thousands of dollars, Vial devices could be cheap enough that every doctor could have one in their office, making for easy, quick, and painless breast cancer screenings, among other things. Beyond that, Vial devices could replace security cameras in some environments too. It's a very exciting new technology. Enroll in eTeacher's online Hebrew courses and quickly discover that it creates the deepest connection to Israel that you could ever imagine. And now for our Hebrew word of the day. We recently heard about what a huge influence the pomegranate is on both Israeli and Jewish culture, so today's word is rimon, meaning pomegranate. Rimonim or pomegranates are everywhere in Israel, piled up in the shuk, bottled up in juice, and used in certain high holidays. There's really no way to escape the rimon. Not to mention the fact that you see images of the rimon practically everywhere you turn. In Judaism, the rimon is a common symbol in reference both to good deeds and fertility, among other things. Fun fact though, a rimon is also a hand grenade, which if you think about it makes perfect sense. Good deeds, fertility, and hand grenades all behave in much the same way. For better or worse, they all spread rapidly when used. Now let's go ahead and take a look at the weather forecast. Tonight you can expect clear skies with a low of 73 or 23 degrees Celsius. Tomorrow you can expect some clouds with a slight drop in temperatures with a high of 82 or 28 degrees Celsius. All right, that's it for today's news. Today's exchange rate is 3.52 shekels to the American dollar. Remember to sign up for our daily newsletter at iltv.tv. I'm Aaron Porras, and thanks for watching.